Hello, everybody. I'm just going to do a quick refresher on what we worked on in class today about making sure the notes get held all the way through to the end of their full value. So the first thing we'll talk about in cut time is your half note, and your half note is worth one whole beat. All right, which means if you're starting on beat 1, it gets held all the way until we get to beat 2. And if we start on beat 2, it gets held all the way through until we get to beat 1 of the next measure. There's no space in between them. So successive half notes would go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, off. Right? If you have 2 half notes in a row and then a rest or that it's over, it would go 1, 2, off. Now, you don't really say off, but I'm saying off because I want to make sure you understand when it is time to cut off that note. All right? The other issue is our whole notes. All right? Now, our whole notes are 2 beats long. Please understand, that doesn't mean that it starts at beat 1 and it ends at the beginning of beat 2. Okay, that's only 1 beat of time. We need to go from 1 to 2, and then 2 to 1 of the next measure. 1 off, right? Notice there was no space. There was no early cutoff. There's 3 claps. There's beat 1, beat 2, and then beat 1 of the next measure, right? And we start on 1, and we end on 1. 1. That clap signifies the next beat, the next beginning of the measure, and that is when the whole note should cut off. That's important from note to note, measure to measure. It's especially important in the final measure. All right, the final measure is where many of us are cutting off early. All right, for example, if we're looking at page 93, which is A flat sight reading level 2, when we get to the final 2 measures, where you have 2 whole notes, right? It's going to sound like this. 1, 1, off. Right? Because the first measure, the 7th measure is a 2-beat whole note, which goes from 1 to 2 to 1. And when we get to beat 1 of the next measure, we have another whole note, which goes from 1 to 2, and then 2 to 1 of the next measure. And it stops there early. What many of you have been doing is cutting off on beat 2 of the last measure. 1, 1, off. That's too early. All right, that's no good. You just did a whole note and a half note with a half rest. We've got to make sure the final whole note's equally as long. 1, 1, off. Now, if we look at letter B, and you look at the final 2 measures, something that you as a group are often doing is going 1 and 2 and 1, 2. And notice I stopped right on the beginning of beat 2. I clapped on beat 2, and I said a short half note. But it's a full beat long, so it needs to go all the way until beat 1 of the next measure. 1 and 2 and 1, 2, off. All right, that second half note should be just as long as the first half note. And that's really important, and that's pretty much the point of this assignment, is making sure you hold your notes all the way through to the end. All right, and finally, letter C, final 2 measures. Again, what you might often do is 1 and 2 and 3 and, 1 and 2 and 1 and 2. And you put a finality on beat 2, but the music's not actually over until beat 1 of the next measure, the next unwritten measure, right? There's not a 9th measure, but we need to get to beat 1 of that imaginary 9th measure. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2, off. All right? So that's the idea. And that's how I want to make sure you're counting and then playing these exercises, A, B, and C. I hope you found this helpful, and have a great day.